Let's dive into one of the most famous metaphors in the entire Bible. But what makes this so powerful isn't just the image itself, it's when Jesus said it. This wasn't some peaceful sermon on a hillside. Nope. This was in his final, tension-filled hours with his closest friends right before he was arrested.
I mean, just try to put yourself in their shoes for a second. For 3.5 years, these guys have dropped everything to follow Jesus. And now, he's telling them he's leaving, and they can't come with him. They're confused, they're anxious, frankly, they're terrified. The man they believed was the Messiah is about to leave them high and dry.
And right in the middle of all that fear, Jesus gives them this. Not a 10-point plan, not a list of rules, but a living, breathing picture. A metaphor of a vine and its branches. This one image was meant to completely change how they saw their connection to him, especially after he was physically gone.
So let's really break this down. This whole metaphor is a huge part of what scholars call the farewell discourse. It's basically Jesus' last, really intimate teaching session for the people who knew him best. This is where he cuts to the chase and gets to the absolute heart of what matters. You see, this statement, "I am the true vine," was actually the last of 7 huge I am declarations Jesus makes in the Gospel of John. He'd already said things like, "I am the bread of life," and "I am the light of the world." With this final one, he's signaling a massive shift, a whole new reality in how God relates to people.
But why did he make a point to say the true vine? What was the other vine? The one that wasn't the true one? Well, to get that, we've got to look back at the history his disciples would have known like the back of their hand.
All through the Old Testament, the nation of Israel was called God's vine. It was this powerful symbol of their unique relationship. But as the story goes, that vine ended up becoming fruitless. It failed to produce what God wanted. So when Jesus shows up and says, "I am the true vine," he's making a really radical claim. He's saying that old symbol is done, and it's been replaced by a new, living, and actually effective reality, himself.
And you can really feel this history in a passage like this one from Psalm 80. It's this cry out to God, talking about a vine that he planted, one that was once amazing but is now broken down and ruined. This really set the stage for someone to come along and claim to be the new vine, the one that wouldn't fail.
All right, so now we get to the practical part of the metaphor. If Jesus is the vine and we're the branches, who's the gardener? Or, as the Bible calls him, the vine dresser? Well, Jesus makes it clear, that's God the Father.
And the Father, the vine dresser, does 2 things. First, he removes any branch that's not bearing fruit. But second, and this is so important for the disciples to hear, he prunes the branches that are bearing fruit. The point of all this cutting isn't punishment. It's to make a good branch even better, even more fruitful.
Now, for any of this to work, a branch has to do one thing: abide. That word is everything here. It just means to remain, to stay put, to be locked into this life-giving connection. And let's be clear, a branch's life doesn't come from its own effort or how hard it can hang on. The life, the sap, it only flows one way, from the vine, from Christ, into the branch. It's all about total dependence.
So, what does this pruning actually look like in our lives? Well, it's often linked to what the Bible calls God's discipline. The struggles, the trials, the really tough times we all go through. They can feel painful, for sure, but they have a purpose. They're the vine dresser's tools, cleaning us up so we can produce something better, a character that actually reflects God's holiness.
Okay, so this brings us to a really big question. If this whole thing is about bearing fruit, what exactly is the fruit Jesus is talking about here?
I think the most common answer you'll hear is that fruit means doing stuff for God, being busy in ministry, winning converts. But if you look closer at what Jesus says, that idea kind of misses the main point completely.
And here's the crucial insight. The fruit is, first and foremost, an inner character. Jesus literally says, "I've told you these things so that my joy may be in you." So the very first piece of fruit is joy in Christ himself. And from that joy flows everything else we call the fruit of the Spirit. Love, peace, patience, you name it. It's about who you're becoming, not just what you're doing. Now this deep, abiding connection, it leads to something pretty stunning, a complete change in status. Jesus takes the metaphor one step further and explains what this relationship ultimately leads to.
He looks at his disciples and he tells them, "I don't call you slaves anymore, because a slave has no idea what his master is up to. Instead, I've called you friends." Whoa, that is a massive shift. A slave just obeys orders, no questions asked, without understanding the why. But a friend gets brought into the inner circle. They understand the big picture, they share in the master's knowledge.
And right when they might be feeling pretty good about themselves, getting puffed up about being called friends, Jesus immediately brings them back to reality. He makes it clear this wasn't something they earned. He says, "You did not choose me, but I chose you." It all comes back to the main theme of the whole metaphor. Everything, and I mean everything, flows from the vine, not from the branch.
And that brings us to the final, really challenging takeaway from all of this. After explaining this whole beautiful picture of abiding and bearing fruit, the conclusion isn't a call to action to go out and do more. It's a call to prayer. The argument here is that the real way to become fruitful isn't by running around being busy, but by prayerfully staying connected to the vine, seeking God's will. It just completely flips our whole idea of what a productive spiritual life is supposed to look like.